Ed here with the Digital Digest, and today I wanted to share my first update on my experience with the Sony ZV-1. This camera will officially start shipping tomorrow, June 11th, 2020, $750 US, at least in the pre-order phase, with an eventual price of $799. And while that may sound like a lot for something that isn't an RX 100, this camera is so close to being an RX 100 that it actually is somewhat of a bargain. At the same time, it is far from perfect. Now, many people have been dubbing this the perfect camera for vloggers, YouTubers, and influencers, and we can all understand why. It has a great sensor, a great lens, and something that Sony's never done before, which is a display that flips out to the side, and of course, flips around. And this is a big deal, okay? I mean, this is something that other manufacturers have been doing forever, but for Sony, this is a first. Beyond that, it also has a grip, but remember, this isn't an RX 100 like the Mark V that I have right here, but it does share so much in common with the RX 100 and the camera that I'm filming this on now. You can see my Sony camcorder, which shares that same 1-inch sensor, which is really the backbone of much of Sony's success in the point-and-shoot realm for good reason. Fantastic quality and, prices that don't break the bank. But as I mentioned, this isn't a perfect tool, but it certainly is a very good one. So what are you getting at that $750 price point? A quick catch up for those of you that missed my first look. You're getting essentially the RX 100 Mark V-A, which is its 1-inch sensor, the same processor, the same number, 315 points of phase detection, 425 of contrast, so a very competent autofocus system. You are, of course, getting this flip-out screen instead of the older generations, and it's also really the current generation's flip-around display. So you're losing that. You're losing the metal build. I said earlier in my previous video, weather-sealed build, but it's not weather-sealed, but certainly a more rugged build, I would say. No grip here. You are getting a grip with the ZV-1. With the RX line, you would have to add that. The ZV-1's also a little bit larger. You have no ring on the actual lens assembly, which with all RX 100s you do have, and that can be assigned to either, of course, manually focus or zoom. You also are not getting an actual mode dial. That is, on this camera, simply a mode button. And there's nothing wrong with that. We are getting, with the ZV-1, a hot shoe, where the EVF lives, of course, on the RX 100 5. But in terms of the internals and the lens that you'll have in this camera, the 5A, those are identical. So that's already a good thing. That's certainly not a bad thing to have the 5A's sensor as well as lens and ND filter. All good stuff. Also, the 5 limited to just having a multi-port, which is a micro USB and HDMI port. With this camera, the freshly launched ZV-1, and by the way, they use the same battery. They also have the same location for the battery bay and SD card. Wi-Fi, Bluetooth available here and there, but a little more flexibility here. But the other thing to point out is that this does have a microphone jack, which again is essential if you are looking to use this as a vlogging camera. The most important thing this gets, though, beyond the sensor, beyond the lens with the ND filter, and that, f1.8 24-70 is a solid offering, is that you're getting all of the software updates, all the algorithms, all of the color science that you find currently in the Mark 7, the RX 100 Mark 7, which is going to be, dethroned by the Mark 8, I'm sure, soon enough. Not quite yet, but soon enough, and I'm excited about that camera. And that's really the important thing, because that means you have real-time tracking in the autofocus system for video. You do not have that here in the RX 100 Mark V. You also have eye autofocus detection. You also have 24 frames per second in terms of still imaging. So fast autofocus absolutely is strong here, but it just doesn't have the number of phase detection points found in the RX 100 Mark 7. I think it's 340 340 something or low 350s, which is not that much more, but still something worth pointing out. Also, the buffer on here is not the same as what you'd find in the Mark 7, meaning the number of images that you can take successively. You're going to hit the wall sooner with this camera than you will with the RX100 Mark 7. Beyond that, I mentioned no EVF. Instead, Sony has given us a hot shoe, which is a very good addition, something I think is welcomed, and again, a very good idea for vloggers, YouTubers, influencers alike. The microphone in here is great, quite frankly, and you've lost the flash that you'll find on pretty much every RX100. You can see the flash right there popping out. No flash here. If you want a flash with the ZV-1, you will have to add it. But really, would it be a flash? No, it would be a video light. And that's the beauty of the ZV-1, is that the microphone on board, it didn't blow me away so far, but it's certainly one of the best internal microphones you're going to find on a camera. Now, the simplicity and ease of use, Sony did a great job with this, because I feel like this is, forget about the target audience of vloggers, YouTubers, influencers. How about people that just want something better than what their smartphone, and that's if you own a flagship, iPhone or Samsung Galaxy phone, you want something that shoots better video, better images. Well, this isn't going to do 4K 60 frames per second, but because of that 1-inch sensor, your dynamic range, achieving shallow depth of field, much better, obviously, than any tiny sensor in any cell phone. Smartphone, cell phone, a little dated, huh? And essentially what Sony's done here is give you a layout that I feel like is tailored to someone who's coming from that world. Someone who lives in auto, if they do own an RX100 and have been using it, and they never really use that mode dial that no longer exists here. And you can see the back layout of buttons is nearly identical. It's really when you get to the top that everything changes. So instead of the record button being here on the thumb area, it's been intelligently moved off of the thumb area up to here. And this is much better, in my opinion. No question about it, a great improvement. They've also given you a defocus button right here, so that if you want to blur the background while you're on camera, make sure that you're the only subject in focus, you have a quick way to do it. Another very smart thing that you could, of course, do manually with any of the RX100s, but the fact that they're integrating the software and a physical button tells you exactly who this camera is really aimed at. In addition to that, they've also given you a product showcase mode, which for reviewers, for influencers, if they're showing a product and they're on camera, then they want to quickly move the product into frame, the camera will immediately shift focus. It's intelligent enough to recognize that. Now, bear in mind, no steady shot can be on, because the assumption is when you're using that product showcase mode, the camera's on a tripod or this Bluetooth grip, which I highly recommend if you're actually purchasing this to vlog or for just personal use. It doesn't have to be to become, the next famous YouTuber or influencer. I highly recommend this Bluetooth grip. I mean, I already own it. Those of you that follow my channel know that. So even though this is a review unit from Sony, I already own this. I use it with all of my Sony cameras that support this Bluetooth grip, because it's just a beautiful thing to have wireless control for still and video capture and zoom functionality, and then a small tripod on the go. So, must have, 140 bucks. In my opinion, don't think about it. If you're buying the ZV-1, you want this grip. And when the grip came out, I wasn't sure, they put the A6600 on the box. I have the box here somewhere in the studio, but it really feels like it was designed for this, and we just didn't know that this was on the way. So, all good things, really positive. I like the front video light lamp to tell you that you're actually recording. I'll show you that functioning right now. Let me flip out the screen. And by the way, to me, this flip out screen, I actually prefer the one on the traditional RX100, only because from a still perspective, you can achieve so many more angles with this display than you can with this. It's just a matter of personal preference. Doesn't mean I dislike this. But so let's say I wanted to start recording video. Big fat button up there, you're not going to miss it, right? You can see we now know, our subject knows they're being recorded. So this clearly feels like a video camera first, no question about it. And that's because it really is. I had said in my first video that it still wears the DSC moniker, digital still camera. It does not. It's just digital camera, DC. So it's a new genre, a new segment for Sony, and I'm glad they're doing new things, especially during a pandemic. Nothing new had to be done, right? No. But this camera has a tremendous amount of potential because another thing it incorporates, which I mentioned, or I think I mentioned, but my videos aren't scripted, so I don't know, and I also don't do that much editing unless something horrible happens, is that we have active steady shot, which right now is only in the RX100 Mark VII. That's a $1,300 point-and-shoot camera, and that is critical because if you plan on walking around and vlogging or just being able to get stable video footage without a gimbal, it is a must-have. And I'll get to all the accessories you see here, those of you that are wondering, that's coming, don't worry. So the active steady shot, the 1-inch sensor, the flip to the side screen, the tally lamp for knowing that you've got video recording, all critical. So you might be wondering, well, where does it fall short then? These are all good things that I've described. Well, for me personally, thinking of this as a vlogging dream would mean that it would have to be more suitable for video. And when you hear that, you might scratch your head. Well, so far you described something. It's very suitable for video. Well, yes and no. In my very first test of this camera, I was getting overheating warnings. And yes, you can disable the overheating threshold, and you can keep recording 5-minute clips. And I've done that in the past. Now, whether or not that will damage the camera over time, I can't say, and Sony doesn't say either. But one has to believe that the overheat indicator has always been there for a reason, right? It's not by chance. So that's something I have to mention because the fact that it was overheating in my very first 5-minute clip, and yes, I do live somewhere where I'm dealing with hot weather now in the 80s and high humidity, but I was inside my house. I was inside, with air conditioning set to 70. So to see it overheat that quickly, I really thought, based on the reviews that I had seen and read already before getting my loaner from Sony, that overheating was going to be less of an issue than it has been in the RX100 line, where, these cameras are somewhat notorious for their overheating. And especially because we've moved from a magnesium body to a polycarbonate, I thought, all right, and the screen flips away, kind of a no-brainer. Now, this doesn't mean that you can't lift the threshold and the camera won't work for years. I'm not saying that, but I expected a little more from Sony on the overheating, especially considering what so many of their, inner circle, I'm part of the circle, but I'm not, I didn't get it when a lot of other reviewers got it. And they've been reporting it as if the overheating is, many of them, not all of them, and I'm not, knocking anybody, but they've kind of made this out to be perfect. And the fact, again, that I got overheating warnings immediately in a 70, it was probably about 72 degrees indoors, that I didn't expect. So it's not a knock against the camera, but something you need to be aware of. But otherwise, the focus system is very good. The implementation of features, the price point. I think they've gotten most of everything you could want to get right on a first-gen product, they've done properly. And those of you that follow my channel know that I think Sony does really set the standard in digital imaging. So, as I said in my previous video about this, when I received it, before I started testing it, I was just happy to see a new product category from them, and I still am. Because I think this is a good start, and they will just build upon it. And I know this is sounding a lot like a full review, but I'm not there yet. I don't have that much time left with the camera, but I'm still working on it. So let's talk about accessories, because as I mentioned, you've got a great tri-capsule microphone array here, which if you don't have a dedicated mic to hook up to the mic jack, you'll be okay. And wind noise reduction works, especially if you put the little dead cat on, one of these, which I don't have on. I don't like to use them if I don't have to, but if you're in windy conditions, you have to, right? It cuts it, it works. And that's, again, a good thing. What I was really hoping, and this is some of the stuff that disappoints me, but maybe it's because it just wasn't implemented this time around. First and foremost, I mentioned, you have no electronic viewfinder here. All the other RX100s since, what is it, Gen 4, have EVFs. Gen 3 was the last one not to have one, and that did have a hot shoe. And I'm going to keep pointing to the RX100 because after all, even though this isn't an RX100, it's built around the sensor, the heart and brains of the RX100 line. So this EVF, which is an oldie but goodie, does not work. Pop it on, you're going to get that the accessory is not supported. And for proof of that, just so everyone sees, not that they think I'm making this up, but we'll go ahead and pop it on. Unfortunate. I mean, I was really hoping we would see that this would actually be functional. Let's go to the next accessory. So let's say you wanted an EVF, it's not going to happen even though an EVF exists. Now, could this be addressed in firmware? Probably. And this EVF was so expensive that maybe Sony figured nobody is really going to want to grab one of these because, the camera's only $750, $800, and this EVF back in the day was like $400 back in the day. Next accessory, a favorite of mine, Sony's latest purely digital shotgun microphone, okay? This is a winner device if you have a camera like the A7R IV that supports it. To my knowledge, that is the only camera right now that supports it. So I figured, there's no way the ZV-1 isn't going to support this, right? Because it's just a no-brainer, if I can get it in there. It's a no-brainer considering that this is, one of their latest devices. And so here we go. Same message again, not supported. So maybe Sony can address this in a firmware update. That's what I'm hoping, because even though the audio is very good from that tri-capsule array, this microphone is one of the best of its kind. But again, you have to be, let's see if I can get it off, you have to be using a camera that supports it. Doesn't seem to want to release. There we go. So another thing to note. So what will work with the ZV-1 and is ideal to use with it? Well, first and foremost, from a microphone standpoint, a Rode Video Micro like this is going to work, but that's because this is an analog mic and you're going to plug it in, wrong side, to the microphone port right here. So, I mean, if you want to shoot with something like this, you're good to go if you really want better audio, but I would argue that these are very close when it comes to overall quality. So I don't see a huge upgrade going that route. Now, if you want what I think is best for this, and it's what, most reviews have mentioned and pointed to, is something like what I'm using right now to record this video, which is the Rode Go, Wireless Go, or the Comica Boom XD. These little wireless transmitter systems that basically can act as a lav, but also can have a lav attached to them. This is what you're going to want, because with these, they are actually set up to snap right into the hot shoe, so you can actually just have it seated right there on top of the camera, just like that. And of course, again, you're going to have it wired to the other side, which is a little bit unruly. I feel like, maybe this the mic jack should have been put on the other side. But the good news is that something like the Comica is going to give you the ability to monitor your audio. So that's a plus, because there is no headphone jack here. So be aware of that. And then last but not least, if you're looking for a light, you don't have a flash, as I mentioned, but forget flash. You're shooting video, right? What if you want a video light? Bowling P1, perfect accessory. I have a Falcon Eyes, also a perfect, I've reviewed several of these. My favorite actually is part of my future Twitch setup, which I'll reserve for another video, but this is how you're going to achieve a true video light on this tiny camera. Now, this is pretty large. There are smaller ones out there that you can pick up, and then you'll be good to go in terms of having a video light and adjusting it to your heart's content. I mean, but this will work. And that's because it is independent, has its own battery, and you just turn it on and off. And so that gives you an idea of the range of accessories that you could employ with this camera. So that was something I felt was necessary for the update, just to let everyone know in terms of compatibility. I probably should have said it right at the top. But as far as compatibility goes, don't expect an EVF. Don't expect Sony's latest digital shotgun mic. But, the traditional suspects, the usual suspects of independent video lights and hardwired microphones like the Rode Video Micro or the Comica or the Rode Wireless Go, those are all going to work. I think the best thing to use, though, is going to be something like the Comica or Rode Wireless Go because, as I mentioned, you will have the ability to monitor audio, and I just feel like that should have been on here. So overall, hopefully this gives you an idea of where things are at with this camera. This video ran longer than I anticipated, but this is a pretty impressive piece of gear. I think the price is right. I think they've hit the right market in terms of who they're after. I mean, I had friends of mine, one of my best friends, reach out to me and say, is this the one I should buy? And he hasn't purchased a camera in years because his phones, whether it was the Pixel or now an iPhone, those have become the go-to cameras for not just him, but many of you out there, understandably. And at least from reviewers thus far, the verdict's been in. This is the be-all, the end-all for point and shoots. And, it's throw the manual RX100 crap out the window and get this. Well, I can say yes and no to that. This isn't my final opinion, but it's my opinion so far. And remember, the touchscreen on this, you can use to, actually change the point of focus, but it's very limited. You're not going to go through menus with this. That's not happening. It's the same touchscreen implementation that Sony has in other existing latest gen cameras. That's also good. It's not a bad thing. But I think that if they were going to stay in theme with the simplicity and ease of use, this could have been an opportunity for Sony to, come up with a new menu system, fully blown touchscreen, and really make this, as simple as it could ever be. And don't worry, I mean, you still have a mode button to take you through the modes. But again, I don't feel like users that are picking this up for the purposes I've mentioned are going to care about jumping in and out of different modes. It really boils down to the autofocus capability, the tracking, which is fantastic so far, and of course, overall, feature set. And it does really have just about everything that you want. I think most want, but there are still limitations, like any product. Battery life, not amazing. I think that, had they been able to find a way to stick a larger battery in here or optimize things even better, that would have been another area. But I'll get more into that as I come up with my final impressions. But this has been a pretty deep dive into what my experience with this camera has been so far. So I really like what they've done. But like any product, it's not perfect, but there's no question to address what I touched on at the top of the video about this being the perfect vlogging camera, at least when you look at the rest of the competition. I think that's the context you must put this in. Then yes, I do not think there is a better vlogging camera on the market. Does that mean it's perfect? No. It just means it's better than anything else that anyone has put forward thus far. And let's not forget that Sony has promised that this is going to have webcam functionality as well. That's another great thing. Panasonic just rolled that out to all of their interchangeable lens APS-C cameras, to my knowledge. I didn't go through what generations because I don't have many of those, but it's something Sony should be doing across the board, not just for the ZV-1. I mean, any camera that came out, in my opinion, in 2019 or later, Sony should be able to give us that capability. They all have, as far as I know, the processing power to handle it, if this camera does. After all, this is the same processor that you'll find, again, in the RX100 5A. So the difference is it has the new algorithms for, as I mentioned, real-time tracking, eye autofocus, so the subject tracking, all that stuff, the new color science, S-Log, HLG, that's all there. And believe it or not, those are omitted from more expensive cameras. So it's a lot to think about here. I mean, the ZV-1 does so many things well. I was convinced that it would be right to add one for my channel. The verdict is still out for me. Still working around it, trying to figure out if it really has a place in my workflow. And I'll probably end up getting to that in my final review. But so far, there's certainly a lot to like about this, and there's a reason everyone has been so excited about it. But it's just not perfect. End result, you know. I feel like this camera has gotten so much praise that I don't want people to buy it and be disappointed. And I'm afraid that that may happen, not because it isn't a great camera, because it is. It's just not perfect. Nothing is in this world. This is not a perfect world. I'm not going to even get into that right now. But at least as far as I could tell, as of today, the 10th of June, what was available through like B&H and a lot of different vendors for shipping date of the 11th, it no longer is. So that means this is selling really well. And I'm glad. I mean, it makes sense. Perfect pandemic launch. And when can you say that about anything tech related? You really can't. In fact, you can't say that about anything, because pandemic is a horrible time to be trying to sell anything that's a luxury good. And this is a luxury good. That's for sure. But hope this catches everyone up. Really like this camera. And if you made it this long, congrats. I mean, you've got a full breadth of knowledge, at least based on my experience with it so far, which has been mostly around the house and outside with my pup. And I've got a lot of great footage, and I may end up throwing up some samples, but it looks a lot like what I get out of my ARX 100s to begin with. It's just that the autofocus and, of course, the ability to frame yourself has changed. But most importantly, that active steady shot, which even though it's a crop, you now have footage that doesn't require a gimbal for stabilization. And that to me is critical. I mean, it's long overdue for Sony to be incorporating that into more cameras. And when it first was introduced, I went out on a limb and said, I have a feeling we'll see this in a lot more Sony cameras going forward. And here we have it. So this shows a lot of promise for what is to come also. Very exciting times, in spite of them being also very bad times in the world right now. You know, for multiple reasons, between the pandemic and, of course, the horrible things that are systemic that I'm not getting into with racism. Any questions or comments, please feel free to post them. Hit that like button. And as usual, please feel free to subscribe. And please stay safe. Later.